Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you so much for joining me as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for the worlds that Obsidian has created for us. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and Avowed. For any of those wondering why it is we pair those games together, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. And so if you're new to this show and you're learning about the world that these games are set in, welcome to the show. Really happy to have you here. I'm going to signpost you to episode 0, where I further signpost you to more foundational lore, but today will be an okay episode to start with as well, although there may be some spoilers discussed in this episode regarding the gods of Eora. Nothing major, like no major plot narrative details spoiled for any of those games, but just like revealings of some of the deities themselves. In today's episode, I'm going to be discussing the 4 gods that we see totems for in the game of Avowed. I might touch on a little bit upon 4 other deities that they have conversations with that we see in the game of Avowed. For those that have played through the game entirely, you might already be figuring out that I'm going to be kind of talking about the God Totems today that we see in Avowed. But more specifically, I'm actually wanting to aim this episode about what the lore implies a acolyte or scholar of any one of these main deities would be like. Because at this point in time, Avowed, a lot of us have played all the way through it. If you are new to the game, I hope you're enjoying it. But as you're playing through the game, you might recognize that there is opportunity for creating quite a character build in your mind, including a role play for what you might want to have. And there are these god totems that you can collect in the game that let you create these little shrines, if you will, at your party camp to 4 main gods in particular. And I got to wondering, what is it that our characters can roleplay like within the game of Avowed if we were to, say, be a devotee of one of these 4 deities? And it led into an interesting little research project, just kind of diving into these 4 deities in the first place, looking back at lore through Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, and just kind of seeing what these deities are about in the first place. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. No news about Avowed or Pillars of Eternity so far. Grounded is the kind of the main thing that Obsidian is doing right now. Then they just released a hot fix for some issues that were happening in the game, which I was very happy to have. I've been playing that game nonstop, absolutely loving Grounded. The Obsidian team is killing it. If you enjoyed Grounded 1, you will enjoy Grounded 2. And it has a lot to start off with, especially for being in early access. So it's exciting to see where it might go from here on in. But this is not a podcast about Grounded. This is a podcast about Eora and Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. So let's dive into today's lore, shall we?
Half the locals would arrest you for trespassing and the rest would kill you outright. I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
So as previously stated, there are 4 sets of totems that you can create in the game of Avowed that are devoted to particular deities within the Eoran pantheon. And that is the pantheon of gods that has existed as established in the Pillars of Eternity games, and we hear about them in Avowed. We don't interact with the gods at length in Avowed. We don't get to discuss them at length in Avowed, which I was personally a little bit disappointed about as a fan of this world. However, there is a lore reason for why that is. I'm not going to dive into it because it has some implications about the narrative, and I don't want anyone figuring it out by accident, so I'm just going to leave it alone. But suffice it to say that you don't really need to be discussing the gods at length in the game of Avowed to get the full narrative of it. But there are obviously some alludements to them. We can read some basic scripture in each one of the gods' domains, and we might get a little bit of a taste for what some of the clergy or worshipping circles of these deities might be like. And in particular, in the 4 main biomes of Avowed, Dawnshore, Emerald Stair, Shatterscarp, and Galawain's Tusks, we can collect these pieces of a totem that we then put together at our party camp to have one full created totem, and that totem is dedicated to one of these 4 gods that we collect these items for. As a result, our character gets some bonuses, assuming that you worship one of these shrines or that you dedicate yourself to one of these shrines. You pick one of the 4 shrines and you get a bunch of gamey mechanical stuff, and it's great, and you love it. But as far as role-playing goes, you can also kind of select one of these shrines as kind of your patron deity or the god that you might be worshipping to at this time. Now, that does lead me to an interesting thing to talk about regarding polytheism in this game and how it might be expressed within the world. I'm not an expert on polytheism myself because I don't know everything about it, but it's a interesting kind of discussion because when you get into the world of Eora, you start to see people that refer to praying to more than one deity at a time. And I don't know about you, I always thought that was kind of odd. I was like, well, what's the idea? Like, wouldn't you dedicate yourself to one god and leave it at that? But you have these people that like kind of dedicate themselves mainly to one god, but they also talk with the other gods. They also pray to the other gods for other stuff. And what's up with that? And I was interested to find out that there's actually kind of real world analogies for this. And I guess it's kind of obvious now that I think about it. But regardless, there are people who are in like polytheistic cultures or religions or worldviews. And it was not necessarily out of the question that you would pray to multiple gods depending on the thing that you were praying for. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it. When you have all these different deities that have their domains over different aspects of life, if you wanted something that had to do with your crops, you would pray to the god of agriculture. You know, if you want to have something to do with money, you would pray to the god of money or whatever it is. So there's kind of a little bit of logic to that. But in the world of Eora, we do see people doing that, but very often you find most people are dedicated to one deity at a time. And it usually involves around what the surrounding culture believe in, but the surrounding society as a whole might have multiple patron deities that are normally worshipped within the entire nation. You see this when exploring Pillars of Eternity and you look in the lore of, say, like a nation such as Aedir, which is where the Avowed player character comes from. And the main faiths worshipped in Aedir are Woedican and Barith, and I think Hylia or maybe Galawain, something like that. Either way, there's multiple gods that are kind of like the main gods of that nation. And I don't know if Obsidian is trying to say that the four kind of main patron deities of the living lands, at least regarding the people that moved there, would be these four gods that we get to see, which is Woedican, Skain, Wal, and Galawain. But it's definitely not an unheard of thing that these people would pray to multiple gods, even though most people in Eora, if they are going to dedicate themselves religiously in any ways, they tend to focus on one god more than the rest, especially depending on the relationship that the gods have. And that's an also interesting thing to think about, especially if you're thinking about this from a roleplay perspective. If you were a character who is dedicating themselves to a deity that has odds with a different deity, then it would seem like if you were going to, let's say, pray to the god of Hylia, that you would then not necessarily pray to the god of Mogren, because they're kind of at odds with each other in a lot of different ways. And you might have wrath from one god if you were kind of dipping your toes in both of those pools, so to speak. And so this is kind of the approach I'm wanting to take in talking about the gods of Eora today, is like looking at these four deities and what it might be like for any one character to be a follower of that deity, and how maybe we can apply that to our character in Avowed in some form of a role play. So with that said, let's dive into the four main gods that we see. There are 11 gods within the world of Eora. I'm not going to touch on every one of them. We're just going to mainly talk about these four that we see these totems for. The first one being the goddess Woedican, goddess of law, memory, rightful rulership, and vengeance. We can get her totem of rightful rulership from the region of Dawnshore. The next god is the god of Skain, god of secret hatred, resentment, and violent rebellion, and we get his totem pieces in Emerald Stair, the second region of Avowed. Next is Wal, god of dreams, secrets, mysteries, and revelations. We get their totem of revelations in the region of Scattersharp, and Wal is my own personal favorite deity within this game world, by the way, just a little fun fact. And lastly, we have Galawain, god of the hunt in all of its forms. We reach the Galawain's Tusks region of Avowed, the final region, and we collect the totem pieces of Perseverance. Now, I want to say right off the bat, as far as roleplay goes, I think it was a really smart choice on Obsidian's part to put Woedican in the area of Dawnshore. And I'm sure this was on purpose, because the region that you come from in the world of Eora as the player character, the Envoy in Avowed, is you're coming from the nation of Aedir. And while there are multiple faiths that are worshipped and formed in Aedir, the chief among them all is the Church of Woedican. Woedican is practically the state religion in Aedir, and so it makes sense that your character coming from Aedir might also be Woedican, or at the very least they would be very familiar or somewhat familiar with Woedican theology. And so it kind of makes sense that if you were going to roleplay a character in the game of Avowed, that you would want to have the option to have Woedica's totem at the start of the game to kind of maintain that, roleplay, if you will. At least that's kind of how I viewed it, as this character, the Envoy, coming from Aedir, they come to the Living Lands, and right out the gate, I'm able to get this religious totem dedicated to the god of the nation that I came from. Makes a lot of sense that my Envoy would want to use that. And so, my character, obviously, I select that for the gaminess of it. I use that to get the perks out of it, but it also made sense on a role-playing front. But then as you progress through the game and you collect these totems for Skaenite and Wael and Galawain, perhaps you find yourself drawn to one of the certain totems of these other three deities. Now, from, a gameplay standpoint, perhaps we're looking at, the +1 to perception and intellect over the other, attributes within the game. But you can also bring a little bit of roleplay into this, in that perhaps your character, through their experiences in Avowed, is starting to become a little more convinced of the theology of a different deity within the world. And so when you select this new totem, if you will, within the game, there could be some element of like roleplay or headcanon that you can bring into this of like, why would my character do that at this point in their story? So I'm not going to talk at length about Woedica because I have talked about her a lot in more recent episodes because she has come up quite a lot. I will say this about Woedica. She comes up often in Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. She is clearly one of the deities at Obsidian who has got a lot of attention and is very clearly important to a lot of the narratives that happen in the World of Eora, at least from these games' perspective. And I'm almost wondering if that's like part of the mandate of Eoran-based games, is that they have to involve Woedica in some way. And she has to almost be antagonistic, not necessarily antagonistic. I don't want to try to get into that too much, but she definitely has an antagonistic feel to her. The Steel Garrote Paladin Order that we see in Avowed are also zealous worshippers of Woedica. Then that Paladin Order does also happen to come from Aedir. Reading off of Pillars of Eternity fandom website regarding Woedican worship, it says that priestesses of the Exiled Queen, which is another name for Woedica, serve as lawyers and judges in towns and urban centers, and most prominent among them are advisors to kings and lords. They are of particular importance in the Empire of Aedir, which we've already talked about, where by tradition, business contracts always require their endorsement. Her devotees are typically found in upper classes, but any conservative person who longs for a vanished past will find a place in her faith. When Woedica takes back her crown is a common saying amongst her followers, signifying a utopian future when society will be properly ordered once again when she takes her rightful place as the ruler of the gods. And so when it comes to like Woedican theology and worship, and if you remember their clergy, Woedica is all about law and justice and rules, and that can make her sound like maybe a lawful good kind of a deity in this world, but I would very much argue that that is not necessarily what Woedica is about. There is a wonderful character by the name of Tej in Avowed that you can talk to, and he is a Aediran loyalist through and through, and he is a Woedican worshipper. He loves the religion of Woedica. He's not crazy and talking to you about, have you met your Lord and Savior Woedica anytime, but he likes to talk about the theologies. And if you get a chance to go talk to him in the Aediran Embassy, I highly recommend it. And one of the things that we learn about Woedican theology is very much if you have the grit to to do well in that religion, then you will be rewarded for it. Woedica is a religion that rewards people that work hard because you are earning your salvation, is basically kind of how it goes. If you are going to gain the favor of Woedica, it's because you have earned it, and you have earned it through hard work and obedience and following the way that Woedica does things. And so the Woedican worship is very much reliant upon drawing firm lines in the sand and saying, these are these lines, we do not cross them, and there is no exceptions. And anyone who crosses those lines, they have very specific consequences for doing that, and that is to be, followed through with no regard to like the situation itself. Like, these are the rules, these are the consequences, this is what happens, and that is how it goes. Very, very much a lawful type of group, whether you say the lawful good or not, maybe lawful neutral. I know that using the morality kind of scale that we see from tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons is not necessarily the most respected, but it is a way of talking that other people can kind of understand, so I will use that occasionally. But that's really a lot of what Woedican worship is like. And so as a character of like the Envoy coming from Aedir, if you were role-playing that, you might find that the Envoy is a person who like is that kind of a character. They have this strict code of ethics that they are living by. This is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is what's been made legal, this is what is not, though for important reasons, and we are going to stick to that. And like with all the God Totems, once you collect all the pieces and you're back at the party camp, you can activate the totem itself to gain a number of mechanical things. As well, you get to overhear a conversation between the deities about what's going on in the living lands. And in this first instance, we have the goddess Woedican, who we were talked about, and Hylia, goddess of birds and the sky, having a discussion about something that they discovered in the living lands, something that have to do with essence and Adra. And there's some sort of entity, there's some sort of mysterious, enigmatic force or thing that is in the living lands that Hylia has detected and Woedican is very concerned about. If you're interested in hearing this conversation, you can do so by, well, one, playing the game, or if you're on YouTube, I was able to find a video by YouTube channel BUE, Restored Scales of the Oathbinder bonuses plus Woedican and Hylia dialogue was the name of that. As you progress through the game of Avowed, you eventually come to Emerald Stair, which is where Fiorme Verno is, as well as the companion Giada. None of those have anything to do with what we're going to talk about today, but we are going to talk about the god Skaen. I have talked about Skaen at length before. Skaen is the token evil god of the Pantheon. He's not evil just to be evil, but he definitely is evil. Skaen is the god of, as we said, defiance, secret hatred, covert plots, and violent rebellion. Skaen is often associated with the uprising or rebellion of poor against the rich and the destruction of oppressive forces. The Quiet Slave, which is another name for Skaen, has no official clergy or temples, and his worship is conducted in secret. And I'm reading that right off of the fandom website for Pillars of Eternity. The totem that you collect in Emerald Stair region is called the Schemer's Offering. The Schemer is referring to Skaen. And when you first read about this god, you kind of feel like you want to be on his side. At least a lot of people, I think, nowadays would, in the sense of like, oh, it's about, taking down oppressive people. It's about the poor kind of giving back to the rich what they think they deserve kind of thing. Like, I can understand. There's a lot of narratives I think many people nowadays are sympathetic with to that. And so to that degree, Skaen is a god that a lot of people might be attracted to. And it's that very feeling that a lot of people, you even listening to this, might have, that makes Skaen as possible as a god as they are. Because people in Eora will feel that as well. They have these campaigns that against an evil oppressor or someone that they think is an evil oppressor that they want to go against. There are people that are poor and sick and tired of the distribution of wealth in this world. And so there is a god that they can turn to. However, Skaen, as far as gods go, is still not necessarily the greatest of gods. Very often you'll find that Skaenite worshippers form a cult in a negative sense of the word, like in the pejorative way that we use it. And they kind of form these blood cults, and they do evil sacrifices, and you fill yourself with nothing but this hatred and resentment. And you do all this stuff in secret, which is why there's no temples to Skaen necessarily. To be someone who worships Skaen is to do so in secret, and you are always kind of using your worship of Skaen to take down the people that are above you, which kind of, from looking at it, to me has almost a contradictory to it. Like, if you take down the people above you, then what would you do? Did you take over that spot? Now you're above other people, and what's to stop them from praying to the god of Skaen to take you down? Perhaps there's some level of accountability in there that you don't want your underlings to pray to Skaen to take you down, and so maybe you should be a good master or employer or what have you. But you never know how people are going to feel about you, despite maybe some of your best efforts, especially if you're a person in charge of a very complex situation. You have to make decisions that are going to upset a lot of people. And we see things like that in the game of Avowed, where your player character, the Envoy, makes some pretty consequential decisions, possibly for good reason. But what's to stop people from wanting to pray to the god of Skaen that you would be removed from power or killed outright? People that do submit themselves to Skaen are often, they're doing so in secret, and they're harboring that bitterness and resentment and anger. And eventually they want to kill the people that are in this position. This is not a nice little religion where you're trying to think to yourself, well, I hope that this person gets fired from their job and, they learn their lesson afterwards and all that. Like, no, it's very much this person's bad, I want them to die, so Skaen, give me what I need, or give someone else what they need to take this person down and end their life. Like, it's pretty dark stuff. And it culminates in the most extreme form of following Skaen in a thing called the effigy, which is a manifestation of the god within the real world, but it happens as the result of a very bloody ritual within this world where a person basically rips a whole bunch of their body apart. They like gouge their eyes out and they, take off their genitalia or something. I can't remember, but it's a pretty gruesome thing that you have to do to your own body, and it will result in you basically dying, not just from your wounds, but also some stuff that you got to drink. There's a whole schwack of stuff that goes on there, and there's not even a guarantee that your body, your dead body, will become the effigy for Skaen to live through and run rampant through the world and kill the oppressors and violent and army or whatever that is before you. So it's like, that's the most extreme version of it. When you really start to get into Skaen, you see a lot of really grotesque and awful stuff, which I think is an interesting metaphor. I don't know if this is what Obsidian intended anyway, about how violent and secrecy and bitterness and hatred, when harbored in that secret kind of a way, can make us these like ugly things on the outside. At least that's kind of how I'm viewing it. When you're collecting the totem pieces in Emerald Stair, we have to collect 6 pieces. There is the effigy necklace, the idol of covert plots, idol of secret hatred, idol of violent rebellion, obsidian prayer beads, and sacrificial dagger. Those 6 pieces come together to form the schemer's offering. I find the idol of violent rebellion the most interesting. It's when you read the item description of this unique quest item, it reads, holding this idol reminds you of every time someone in a position of power gave you an unjust order or treated you with prejudice. And when you, obviously as a person, if you're thinking about those moments and that you have a very personal connection to because they happen to you, you're going to have the anger and resentment start to build. And this is the idol of violent rebellion. And that's, I think, what the root of violent rebellion is you have something like that you're holding on to that kind of fuels you to be able to do these extreme things in the first place. And so if your character is playing through Avowed as the Envoy, and perhaps you start to view something about Skaen that you think is admirable. Perhaps as the Envoy, you're coming here to the Living Lands, and you're looking at what the Steel Garrote is doing in the Emerald Stair, or you're looking at how your nation, the Aedir Empire, are handling themselves in the Living Lands. And maybe you're even starting to become sympathetic to that. Maybe you're starting to think that the people in charge need to be taken down a peg. And maybe you think that Woedican, or not Woedican, Ludwine, the Steel Garrote leader of this area, needs to be taken down. Or you hate Alfir of the Steel Garrote. I don't know about a lot of you. The first time I had a chance to actually engage in combat and kill her, I did. 100% I did. And I think in that sense, my character was being kind of almost Skaenite-ish in that way. Now, a person who follows Skaen in this world does so with an impassive face, and they do it secretly. They would be like, yes, master, of course, master. They would be the best servant, whatever word we want to use. And then when they have a moment, they would let their rebellion and their revenge come to fruition. But up until that point, you would never know. At least that's kind of the hope. And unless, of course, like many times in these games, you happen to find the hidden shrine to Skaen that this person has been secretly building underground as they pray to this deity. When you collect all of the pieces, you get to go back to camp, and you can now, use all of the mechanical benefits of this totem at the party camp. You also get to listen to Skaen talk to another one of the gods, Berith, and hear what their conversation is about in regards to the narrative going on in Living Lands. Berith, for those wondering, is god of cycles, doors, and death. I found a couple videos on YouTube. One is Skaen talks to Berith about the Akita, etc., on 1000 MGMANN. As well, there is and that only gives like a first portion of the conversation. As well, there is a second called Eavesdropping on Woedican and Skaen, parentheses Avowed, on Lorebringer's YouTube channel. Technically, this is not a conversation between Woedican and Skaen. This is Skaen and Berith, but regardless, that's a little bit more of the conversation. I was having a very hard time finding the dialogue for this stuff on YouTube if anyone's interested in watching it. So if you know where any of this is stored, please let me know. But Berith and Skaen have a conversation about these people that live in the Living Lands and this kind of like religious worship that they're engaging in and why that will upset the god Woedican and how she might react to this situation. the next of the deities is my favorite of the deities, and this is the god Wal, god of dreams, secrets, mysteries, and revelations. In the game of Avowed, you can collect the totem known as Eyes of the Obscured, which is a weird stone carving with a lot of slots in it for different eyes, and those eyes are represented by different gems that you can slot in. And it's a little disappointing in the sense of, I'm not disappointed in Obsidian, but I'm disappointed in, the amount of lore and information that comes in these items. Because, we talked about Skaen, and he has the Idol of Covert Plots, and Obsidian Prayer Beads, and the Sacrificial Dagger, and there's some lore in there about each thing in that regarding Skaen. When we get to the Eyes of the Obscured God Totem, all the pieces are called the Agate Eye, Amethyst Eye, Emerald Eye, Ruby Eye, Sapphire Eye, and Topaz Eye. They're just different kinds of gems with the word eye after it. And when you read the lore for it, there's not really anything super engaging on there. The Amethyst Eye reads, "An eye of amethyst, its rich color fills you with determination." I don't know if that's an Undertale reference or something, but it doesn't tell me anything about the god or what they're doing here or why this is here, and it makes me angry. But at the same time, that's very much how a Waelite would feel in this world about stuff. Be like, oh, finally, I have an ancient relic of the god. Wow, I'm going to learn something really important. And then you dive into the lore of it, and it's just something that fills you with determination. And you're just this tells me nothing. And that's what Wael does to his followers. He leads them on with the carrot at the end of the stick, and then pulls it away at the last second, or gives them the carrot, and they realize it just was a carrot, or there's nothing extra special to it. But then at the same time, Wael would be the kind of deity to just drop this massive bomb on your lap of knowledge or information that changes the way you view the world and completely turns you into a new and different person, and everyone around you thinks you're a crazy person because of it. The Emerald Eye just says an eye of emerald that discerns your grace and agility. The Ruby Eye watches over you and protects you from harm. The Sapphire Eye eagerly perceives the ever-changing tides in your mind, and the Topaz Eye helps you see through even the most convincing lies. Oh, and I guess I missed the Agate Eye, witnesses your strength of arms and force of will. Now, the most interesting thing we can say about these pieces of the Eyes of the Obscured Totem is that they are somehow peering into your very soul. They are reading you. They're not just these things that are reacting to the world around them, much like the Skaen stuff is. They're not just this well-decorated, gold-inlaid shrine to another deity. They are these pieces that are actually actively, with almost like they have their own consciousness, viewing your soul, which is kind of interesting, and so I'm a little satisfied with that. But why are they looking at my soul? Why do they care about me being filled with determination? Why does it matter that they can see that I can help see through the most convincing lies? What does that matter? I don't know. And it pisses me off, but I also love it at the same time. And people who follow the god Wal, they're known as Waelites, are often praying to the deity to hide secrets or unveil them. Followers of Wael are known for many strange and unusual practices, possibly for good reasons, possibly for no reason at all. Wael followers are often founders and caretakers of centers and learning, including libraries. And I read that off of Pillars of Eternity fandom's website. I like Wael the most because there's a lot of esoteric lore around Wael, and they seemingly know everything, and the reasons for why they do anything is just completely unknown. And their manifestation is unknown, and everything about them is unknown, and the reasons for it's very interesting to a person like myself. The thing that would be interesting, the thing that you would want to note about a person who worships Wael and follows them is that they are also on the pursuit of knowledge, either to reveal knowledge or to hide it. A lot of people that end up following Wael end up in libraries collecting information and books and tomes about the world, and they also engage in an assortment of activities that seem to have no purpose to them. There's one book that you can read in any of the games in Eora, actually, called On the Fireforged Path, The Travels of Yarich Yilton. And this is a story about a person who tries to find a temple of Wael in the Deadfire Archipelago, and he finds a bunch of these people being a bunch of random weirdos, and he asks them to go to their temple, and they just laugh at him, and they hoot and holler and run all over the place, and they break into somebody else's temple, they climb up their sacred tree, and start singing they start singing, I guess, made-up worship songs to Wael on the spot, all while these people in this other church are like, hey, get out of our church, you weirdos. And this person looks back on this memory with positivity. But it's they're just such a random, incoherent mess, and I love everything about them. And so a person who follows Wall is kind of like they're following information. They're trying to reveal and understand the truth about things, but they also crave mystery and enigma in their life. And there is a piece of writing in this World of Eora found in Pillars of Eternity, where this person who knew a lot was almost jealous of another person who was new in the faith of Wall, who had so many questions. This person's like, what about this? What about that? Oh man, I don't know the answer to anything. And this other veteran of the faith is like weeping because he's upset because he knows the answers to so many questions. So he doesn't have anything to pursue in that sense. Having that mystery is part of being a Waelite. There's some really interesting stuff around Wall in the game of Avowed as well. In the first region of Dawnshore, you can actually find a hidden alleyway where a Waelite is, hidden away, and there's some treasure in there to find. And there's a bunch of eyes drawn all over the place, different kinds and shapes, because eyes is a very important iconography in the Waelite faith. In the area of Shatterscarp, you actually get to meet a Waelite acolyte when you find what is usually most people's first of the God Totem pieces in that area. You're also able to find a chest that you can loot, and then the area around you suddenly changes. I'm not going to spoil how, but yeah, it's a really interesting, very Wallish thing to do. A lot of people on Reddit have asked, what the hell's up with this chest, and why does it do this thing when I interact with it? And people very rightfully reply with, oh, it's just Wall being Wall, how they are, or it is, whatever you say. Now, how I imagine this impacting our character, the Envoy, when we're going through Avowed, whether or not you have started to become sympathetic towards Skaen and maybe deposing some of the rulers of this area, I kind of look at this point in Envoy's journey. They're learning some pretty important stuff about the world. There is a massive lore drop at the end of Emerald's Stair that you've been chasing for a while at this point in the game, and you're trying to discover the source of the Dream Scourge, what's really going on in the Living Lands, what is this weird force that's going on. There's so many mysteries that you need to solve. It would almost make sense that your character at this point in time would be like, I want answers. And I remember being in the area of Shatterscarp, I was excited to get into Shatterscarp because I'm like, okay, I've been in this game for a long time, there must be something really important coming up, and I'm really excited to know what it is. So I was getting that point, we've all been there, where you're playing a game and you're just driven to know what happens next, to the point where you're almost skipping side quests. And I was getting to that point here in Shatterscarp. And that's almost kind of Waelite behavior, like a person who just wants to understand and see the mystery be revealed. But at the same time, there is a joy in chasing these things. There's a joy in knowing that there is a mystery in the first place. And at this point in the game as well, you're starting to, get really powerful and able to do a lot of different things. And I don't know about you, but I was starting to just do random things for no good reason, switching up my weapon stuff. I was really goody-goody two-shoes for most of the time. And then in Shatterscarp, I just started being a dick to people for no reason, just because I was goofing around in the game, which is also very Waelite behavior, just random for no good reason. And it kind of matches in the sense of like, I'm this person controlling a character in this world that is fictional, and from the perspective of people who would be in that fictional world, it's just complete and utter nonsense what this Envoy is doing. And I feel like Wall's a very good fit at this point, but especially from a roleplay perspective of wanting to pursue this knowledge. It makes sense that the Envoy would, at nighttime when they go to bed, pray to this deity of like, Wall, help me figure out what the hell's going on here. At the end of the region of Shatterscarp, or at least once you collect all the totem pieces, you can go back to the camp and you can listen in on a conversation between Wall, god of dream secrets, mysteries, and revelations, and the god Magrin, goddess of fire and war. And they're having a conversation about what to do, and I can't really say what it is because it would spoil the game if you haven't gotten that far into it, but they're kind of trying to figure out what to do with something that they've discovered in the Living Lands. Magrin, goddess of fire and war, is kind of coming at it from a tactical point of view of like, we need to understand what's going on here. We have to be decisive and take action, but we got to be cautious at the same time. And Wall just has like a response that completely upends everything Magrin is saying. And they're talking about this thing that they're discussing in almost a way that they're fascinated by what's going on there, despite the fact that it could be a huge threat to them. And so they, that's kind of the Wall side of all this. If you're thinking about making your Envoy a little bit more of a Waelite kind of a character, start just doing things randomly. Don't stick to just one necessary kind of path of why you do things. Try to break the game, if you will. Do quests backwards, do it upside down, use the wrong weapon, or do the right weapon. Be good all the way up until the end, or do everything properly and for no apparent reason. Roll dice before you do anything. I don't know. It's a weird roleplay to get into, but I find it's very fun, especially from a gaming perspective. And the last region of the world is Galawain's Tusks. That's the region that the game is called, and it's also fitting that the God Totem that we collect there is for the god of Galawain, Lord of the Hunt in all of its forms. You're collecting the Huntmaster spoils, which is described in the game Avowed as having a primal beauty about this totem. The symbol of Galawain carved into the bark of its stump seems to hum with a predatory anticipation. When it comes to Galawain, we often associate this deity with, the strong eats the weak kind of a thing. And he's very much about the hunt. And you can picture that how you will in a fantasy world, a ranger tracking an animal through the woods and finally finding the thing and, making a decisive kill against it and overcoming the beast. And now I am the victor over this creature and what have you. But there is more to just that. There's good imagery for it. I believe there's a really strong reason why Galawain is associated with literal hunting in this world. But Galawain is all about perseverance and cleverness, and encourages the survival of the fittest. So obviously people who have jobs that are concerned with frontiersman-related constables, treasure seekers, explorers, those are all, and I'm reading this off of the fandom again, those are all very normal. Any occupation concerned with pursuit or discovery. However, this can also apply to, it says here, even scholars. So you could be an academic student trying to discover something, trying to learn something, and you have to be, an academic powerhouse to rival the other academics in the university you're at or something, right? Like, Galawain goes beyond just the forest and hunting creatures, even though I think that is a very good metaphor for how Galawain is presented in this world. I don't know what worshippers of Galawain are called. I like to call them Galawainian because it's just very fun to say. That doesn't really matter that much. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. The different totem pieces that you collect through the area of Galawain's Tusks are called the Antler of Persevering Stag, Antler of the Pursued Stag, Hunter's Arrows of Seeking, Hunter's Arrows of Slaying, Hunter's Arrows of Surviving, and lastly, Wolf's Pelt Trophy. Those first two antlers, the Persevering Stag and the Pursued Stag, are very interesting for a couple of reasons. One, perseverance and pursuit. Those are very important aspects of Galawain worship. There's persevering through trials, there's persevering to get to the end, there's persevering to win, and then there's also pursuing or being pursued. And how are you as a predator, and also how are you as a prey? I also find it interesting that the outline for the antlers, at least of the icons that I'm looking at, are of two different kinds of deer. And so I think it's almost like it's not two sides of the same coin. It's just like these are both antlers from deer, but they are technically different breeds of deer. So they're two things that are very similar, but they're different. And, I live in a region where hunting is pretty predominant, and we have two main types of deer that we hunt in this region, which is mule deer and whitetail deer. And I know firsthand from being in a family that does do a lot of hunting that the two are not the same. They look very similar. They end up being very similar in the sense of like becoming venison as for food. But in terms of how they behave, what they do, and how you would actually hunt them are very, very different. One of the animals is almost kind of dumb. I'm not saying that they're actually dumb, but they're kind of dumb in the sense of you can make a clapping noise and they'll stop and look at you when you're trying to hunt them. The other one, at the slightest, inclination that there is something unknown nearby, it will run away. It will run away. I've seen these animals like just run away with their kids going, "What's going on?" and like running in circles because they're just like, "Nope, I'm getting out of here." And so they're obviously harder to hunt than the ones that hop away that you can just yell at and they stop and look at you for a while. But the point being is like, I don't know. There's actually no point. It's just a weird observation I made and I kind of just went off on a tangent. The Hunter's Arrows of Seeking, Slaying, and Surviving is a very good kind of Easter egg to the Seeker, Slayer, Survivor DLC of the second Pillars of Eternity game, which is very Galawain focused because that DLC is all about going into... it's interesting. I really like that DLC because, it's the DLC where you have the battle arena. And a lot of us as gamers, we're familiar with that. You have a game, it's fun, it's got combat. So, of course, you need to have a battle arena DLC so you can continue to fight enemies for the sake of fighting enemies. But Obsidian did a really cool thing. They intertwined a really great story and the world lore into that DLC, even though it's basically just fighting a bunch of things left, right, and center. There's a lot of lore that's going on beneath the surface. last item on there is the Wolf's Pelt Trophy, which is just described as a beautiful pelt that still holds the same warmth as if it had just been skinned from a newly slain beast. Obviously, some level of magic to these things, as with anything else in a fantasy world. At this point in time in the game of Avowed, I think that Galawain is a very cool choice by Obsidian. Because if you're familiar with the game of Avowed, and I'm not going to spoil a story that happens here, but this idea of predator versus prey and the strong eat the weak, and pursuit and discovery, I think very important for what's going on, because we're now at the crux of the game. We're at the last major biome before we're starting to get into the end game content. And we're getting to that point where the superpowers of this area are going to kind of culminate and clash. And are you going to survive against these other factions? Are you going to survive against all of these things against you? Are you going to be able to handle that as the envoy of Avowed? And what are you going to do with this information? Are you going to subdue the people? Are you going to be merciful to them? What are you going to do in order to win? Like, how far will you go? And I think it's interesting, especially as we go into the final region and section of the game, the end game content, with this idea of, if you were praying to the god Galawain at this point, if you were the envoy and you walked into the living lands as a Woedican, and as you have trod your way through this dangerous landscape, you've defeated every enemy that you've come up against, you've defeated and overcame every dangerous creature, anything that could kill you, anything that could have stopped you, including some like pretty crazy stuff, some very powerful individuals and very powerful people, and just like odds completely against you. You have overcome all of it. Like, you are Lord of the Hunt at this point in time. You have defeated everything. You're on top of the world at that point. And you hold so much power in your hands. And I think that at that point, it would almost seem realistic for the character of the envoy to kind of move toward Galawain. Because, like I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, if you were a person who, let's say you wanted to pray to Thor or something in Norse mythology, I don't actually know if this is true. This is just an example I heard. I don't actually know if this is how it worked in their religion or their faith or whatever, but the idea being that, like, if you wanted to pray to Thor or Zeus, or I can't remember who from the Greek mythology, you would perform a great act of valor. And then, after performing the great act of valor, you now have Thor's eyes upon you because you've created this great act of valor. And now that you've created this situation where Thor is looking at you, now you pray to them. You know what I'm saying? It's like, if you just pray to Thor in Norse mythology just while you're chilling in bed, he's probably not listening to you, because why would he? But if you've done something really noble and full of, like I said, valor, then now he's looking at you. Now's the time to pray, because he's actually paying attention to you. And I wonder if that's kind of some of the idea going on here with Galawain, of like, you've become this person that is very powerful and you're overcoming these situations. You are, showing the survival of the fittest. You are the fittest. And so would Galawain's eyes be upon you at that point in time? And would you lean into that kind of a religious role play or worship to continue on in such a way to gain his boon? Would the character of the envoy start to see what they're doing here in the living lands, and when they start to see the benefits of following Galawain, especially as they get to know the Pergrunan dwarves and you get to hear a little bit more about Marius, would you start to lean more toward Galawain at this point in time? And I think it's a very sensible choice that the envoy could make. Once you've collected all the pieces of the Huntmaster's spoils, you can then go and select this totem at the party camp, like you can with all the other ones. And you hear a conversation between Galawain and Aethys, who you may have heard about earlier in the game of Avowed. Aethys is god of light and redemption, and he played a very vital and pivotal role in the history of Eora, as well as Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, especially Pillars of Eternity 2. And they have a conversation about this thing that they know about that's going on in the living lands, and these two are discussing the appropriate response to that, and just how big of a threat that this thing actually is that is secretly going on in this area. And I think it's a really good precursor, as I've said, to like the decisions that you're going to make in the end game. It's kind of setting up this idea for you, the player, but who is embodying this envoy here, of like, what are you going to do? Because you are now getting to the point in the game where you're going to have to make a decision. Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? Am I going to follow this path? Am I going to follow that path? Am I going to root for these people or root for those people? And what kind of decisions are you going to make? What are you going to pursue now that you've discovered all this stuff? And so I think Galawain is a very good deity to contrast here with what they believe and what your character's gone through, especially against Aethys, god of light and redemption. Galawain will be all about survival of the fittest, of like, okay, well, we need to overcome and overpower and be stronger than this thing. Whereas Aethys would be more of we need to give this thing a shot. We need to find out where this goes. We need to see how this story plays out. Kind of a deity is what I'm imagining here. And I think that all of this narrative going on in the background is really important when you're like forming in your head what kind of character that you're playing around with. And I think as well, if you're looking into like replaying Avowed in a different way than you played the first, playthrough that you had, or second playthrough, depending how far along you are, using one of these deities as kind of an inspiration for where your character might go is a good way of doing that. Because you have these actual God Totems that you can collect in the world, and so you can say from a roleplay perspective that, oh, like I collected this God Totem, and this is the totem of the deity that I worship. And you can kind of build your character around that. Are you a character that follows Galawain? Do you subscribe to the strong eat the weak? And how can you express that in your role play in the game of Avowed and the choices that you make? Are you all about learning ancient secrets and harboring great secrets and doing things completely chaotically and randomly? Is there a method to your madness, kind of a thing? Do you revel in the mystery? Are you going to do things that people do not see coming? Are you going to kind of be a Waelite in that? Are you going to look at what's going on in the living lands with the political nature of the landscape and the different factions that are at power here and how people might be abusing one or one or the other? Are you going to look at that and say, I need to do something about this? And is that what your character is motivated by? Are you going to be and are you going to go into the extremist state of it and be a Skaenite almost? Or are you going to be an Adiran loyalist through and through? You come to this land, you're either an Adiran or you're a Steel Garrote, and you stick with it because you are a Woedican and you follow the law. You are in the name of justice. You follow the great queen that was and still is, etc., etc. I think these provide 4 really great options for roleplay in the game Avowed, and I help you get into the world a little bit more. And so that's kind of what I've been thinking about over the last week. I just had a whole week of vacation, which I didn't really fill with anything substantive, but I filled it with a little bit of this nonsense. And that's what I've been thinking about this last week, especially as I look down the barrel of Avowed getting more updates out, that I'm going to be replaying a character. And I think to myself, what kind of decisions can I make and how can I create a character that's in this world that is consistent with the lore around me? And I know some people that's not really that important, and I get it. My first playthrough of the game of Avowed had nothing roleplay about it. It was just exploring the world, making choices, having fun, shooting mushrooms in the face or in the butt, and having a good time. That's what it's about. But, when you get into a second playthrough because you want to see what the other decisions are, and then when you do things like, run a podcast, or you're the type of person who likes to replay games over and over again, you start to think, what kind of character am I building? Like, why are they making the decisions they're making? And how can I keep them coherent and consistent throughout the experience? Or how can I have them change in a way that makes sense? For those gamers out there that like to do that, I feel like this is a really good episode for you. For those of you who are new to this game and you're not really trying to think about roleplay, it's still a really interesting thing to look at. And I'm not just saying that to promote my episode to say it was good. I promise you it was good. Because we talked in depth about what it looks like for someone to follow one of these deities. Whether you're the hunter type who would follow Galawain, whether you're a person who has secret plots or, is like operating from the shadows, if you will, thinking of the Shadowing Beyond perk, then you want to follow Skaen. If you're a person who is all about following laws and rules and you're sticking to this like one character build and you're not going to break from it. Or if you're a gamer who just like chaotically does things willy-nilly, you don't care why you're doing it, you're just here to have a good time anyways. Like all these 4 deities that are presented to you and these God Totems that you can select can match a lot of different varieties of gameplay. And we learn more as well about like the people that follow them. A judge or a lawyer would follow Woedican. We learn that, a person who is poor or oppressed or a servant might be a Skaenite in secret. We learn that people who are in librarians and seekers of great and vast esoteric knowledge might be a Waelite, and we've learned about the people who live in Galawain's tusks very sensibly are all people who might worship the god Galawain. They kind of have their own weird religious thing going on over there, but I'm not going to talk about that right now because it could be spoilery, so we're going to leave it at that. But all very interesting stuff about the world. I hope you liked today's episode. Let's get with closing it out, though.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, or if you didn't, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. I always love having conversations about this game or games in general, and if you have any questions or topic suggestions, I'd love to hear them. There are a number of you who have given topic suggestions months ago in the past, and I kind of lost track of them. I'm very sorry about that. So I'm going to start getting on, fulfilling some listener requests for topics. So if you have suggested a topic in the past, even like if it was months ago, hey, please resend some of those to me, or hit me up on Twitter at World of Eora. Let me know what those topic requests are. I know there was someone who wanted to request something about the end of Deadfire, and I can't find that email for some reason, but regardless, there's a few topics I know are requested at this point. So if you have any, let me know, worldofeora@gmail.com. Hit me up on Twitter at World of Eora if you're interested in doing that as well. If you would like to support this show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. If that's not the kind of thing that you like to do, but you do want to support the show, you can do so by engaging with your platform, either by leaving a comment, a rating, or a review, and that helps the algorithm pass it along to other listeners who have the same interests as you do. Lastly, in regards to what have I been playing lately, I am still just playing Grounded 2, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm probably going to be playing Grounded 2 for quite a while. I always keep an eye on Game Pass to see if anything interesting else comes on or is about to leave, so I can just kind of goof around with something else for a little while. Rain World is one such game that I'm kind of interested in touching on, but Grounded 2 right now is really where I'm spending a lot of my time. Me and my crew are almost at the end of the early access stuff. We're grinding now for resources to get the armor and weapons that we really want, so we can go for the end game. We're starting to build our own little houses in weird corners of the map, and we're just loving the whole Grounded experience again. We played hours and hours and hours, easily entered triple digits for Grounded 1, and I can see us doing that again for Grounded 2, especially considering how big the game is going to be in comparison to Grounded 1. And so it's been a phenomenal experience, but if you've listened to me long enough, you'll know I love Grounded 1, so I have kind of a bias in that way. I'm not a big survival crafting geek, but Grounded is different. Grounded is the gold standard for this game. No offense to all the other great games in the genre. That's just my opinion. It's wonderful. I'm largely influenced by their shared world feature, which I talk about a lot, and that's just, if you have a crew of people that you like to game with, but it's really hard to get people on at one time every time, Grounded is a perfect game, because the way they have their save states set up is you can create a shared world so that anyone can log in at any point in time. It doesn't have to be the same dude or dudette who has to log in every time to host the game. Anybody can host the game at any time, and the progress is shared across all the people who have access to that save file. And when you have a crew like mine who don't always get to be able to be on at the same time on a given night, it's really helpful, because when you're all on, great, you can work forward towards some sort of progression together. But when only one or two of you are on, that's still great, because you can contribute to the group effort. There's been a number of times I've logged into Grounded, and it was just me who was able to play that night. And so, I don't want to progress the story without my crew. So what do? Well, I know that this other guy has really been wanting to get this particular weapon or armor, and they need, this one resource. They need some like spider fangs or something like that. So what do? I have 40 minutes. I'm logged on. When I go grind those resources. I leave in a basket for him. He logs in later on that day, or logs in the next day when I'm not on, sees those spider fangs waiting in his basket, and he's like, thanks, man. Now I can go do this other thing I was working on. I can contribute that towards his time. And even though I was playing alone, I still felt like I was part of the group. And I think that was one thing about Grounded that I really found fantastic. I know you can also simulate this by paying for a server, but I don't want to always pay for servers. And I just like that this comes with Grounded. So aside from that, Grounded is just fun to play, running around on top of a bug and creating my own little house in a corner of the map that people are going to have to find. They still haven't found it in this game. It's fun. I haven't played solo, so I don't know what it's like solo. It is fun and engaging gameplay. If you're into survival crafting games on a solo kind of a basis, then you'll probably enjoy Avowed. Hopefully you enjoy Avowed, but you'll probably enjoy Grounded too. But I won't mention any more about that for now, but that is going to be the game I'm playing for quite a while. So if any of you out there have been playing Grounded 2, let me know your experiences with it, or any tips or secrets or tricks or whatever, because love talking about games. So thanks everyone for listening to today's episode about the 4 gods presented in the God Totems in Avowed, and how our character can roleplay them, and what a person may or may not be like who follows one of these deities. I have a really keen interest in the theology and religions in the World of Eora, and I'd like to spend more time talking about them, perhaps in a more crunchier way, where we're actually reading some of the scripture and we're making implications about how people will live. So perhaps I'll touch on that in another episode with different deities, or even some of these same ones here, but that's all for now. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.